High pressure is on the move, and in this video I'm going to tell you why that changes everything in the weather world. In the summertime, as a jet stream migrates to the north, the massive high pressure systems that develop underneath dictate where the storms go and where the heat goes. High pressure is simply sinking air, and that sinking air not only squashes clouds and rain chances, but also compresses, which heats things up. For the first time this season, the jet stream is shooting north, bringing triple-digit heat indices all the way up to near Michigan and Chicago. The severe storm threat that's been plaguing us over the past few days, even past few weeks, will continue, but is also shifting locations, bringing a whole new area under the gun. Today is June 27th, 2026, and today in the weather world we'll track the migration of high pressure system and its implications of the weather all over the country. So starting off right off the bat, we're going to look at the weather pattern to track the high pressure and where it's going to move. Over the past week, the jet stream has been pretty flat. You can kind of see that in these orange contours here. This is called zonal flow. As we go over the weekend though, in the next few days, look how the jet stream quickly changes and shoots up to the north. See this big hump that's developing over the Eastern U.S. This is our ridge of high pressure building, and then look at it strengthen as we go into Monday and Tuesday with this dark red shade. So anyone in that core of high pressure, this is where the heat is going to be at its worst, and this is where we're going to experience our first summertime heat wave of the season. Now on the opposite side, over the Western U.S., we have all these yellow and green, these cooler colors. This is where we have areas of low pressure. We're going to get a pretty big dip in the jet stream over California. This is a trough, and this is going to refocus our potential for severe weather in between these two systems. So you can see how amplified this pattern is. That just means the impacts are going to be pretty dramatic this week. So we have a lot of different features to talk about. We're going to start with the severe weather risk over the next few days, because that's definitely going to be very impactful. The severe weather risk over the past week has been primarily confined to the Central Plains, portions of the Eastern Rockies. The threat is shifting further north, and the Northern Plains, y'all, are now under the gun over the next few days. That's all thanks to that big trough of low pressure that's digging into the Western U.S. So today we have an enhanced risk of severe weather across the Western Dakotas into Eastern Montana. If you're in the red shade, that's pretty significant. For any of your Saturday outdoor plans, you're definitely going to want to plan for the weather and have an indoor backup plan. We also have a slight risk across Tennessee into the Carolinas, especially North Carolina, where we could have a few complexes of storms move through, especially bringing a gusty wind threat, and then a small marginal risk across Texas. The tornado threat has been elevated. There are two areas we're watching. First is in Tennessee, especially in this brown bullseye. A few tornadoes are possible. Shouldn't be anything too strong, but still definitely going to want to stay weather aware in case any of these form. Have a tornado safety plan ready. But especially in this corridor in the Northern Plains, in the Western Dakotas, in the yellow color, and especially that hatch color, that's where there's greater confidence of coverage of tornadoes. That's where an EF2 plus tornado is possible. These are tornadoes that are strong enough to cause more serious damage and potentially threaten lives and property. So in this region, we want an actionable plan ready in case a few of these tornadoes run through. A few supercells could be even producing a few strong tornadoes. Not only is there that tornado threat, there's also a pretty expansive damaging wind threat. If you're anywhere in these hatched lines, which is pretty expansive from Montana all the way into the Western Dakotas and Nebraska, that's where significant wind gusts of 75 miles per hour is possible, but especially in this double hatch line centered over West North Dakota, this is where wind gusts could exceed 80 to 90 miles per hour, and that is very damaging. That is almost as damaging as a tornado, and the problem with damaging winds is it can be more widespread than just a small corridor that a tornado impacts. Even beyond the tornado potential, the damaging wind potential is looking very concerning across this region. Also though, there's a giant hail potential. If you're in these hatch lines, once again, you could be seeing 2 to 3 inch hail in diameter. That's the size of baseballs falling out of the sky. This will definitely do damage to cars, windshields. So it's just going to be a pretty nasty day where all hazards of severe weather are possible. The best place to be this evening in this region will be inside, or if you do have to go out, make sure you're keeping an eye to the radar and staying weather aware. Tomorrow we have another slight risk of severe weather over the far northern plains, North Dakota, northern portions of Minnesota, with the marginal risk extending a little bit further south. Another small marginal risk across North Carolina. The leftover energy of today will be moving off the coast. And then getting into Monday, the severe weather risk sharpens once again over the northern plains, more of Minnesota extending into Iowa, Nebraska, and portions of eastern Dakotas. I will say on Monday there's a lot of uncertainty with the severe weather. It all depends on how our trough of low pressure, the exact orientation, the exact location. So a lot of changes to this map will likely occur. But if you're in this region, just an early heads up that on Monday, that's a day you'll want to be paying attention to the weather. Some strong storms are possible somewhere in this region, and we'll have more specifics of course as we get closer. Let's track the radar out, how it's going to look. We already have a pretty messy scenario across the Kentucky Valley, portions of the central and eastern U.S. We've actually had a significant flooding situation develop over much of Kentucky with multiple clusters and complexes of slow-moving storms moving through. Eventually, as the day gets hotter, as we get more instability with daytime heating, some of these storms in this region will start turning strong to severe, especially as they enter the this yellow slight risk. So again, there is that potential of slightly heightened tornadoes, especially in Tennessee, as some of these storms enter. Otherwise, damaging winds is the main threat. We could be dealing with some outburst winds to watch out for. You can see some storms in this region continuing into the overnight hours with a stalled cold front. Unfortunately, this is going to exacerbate the flooding threat even more with some more heavy rain possible. Storms will likely lose severe status as we get after midnight. We lose a lot of the energy. For Sunday, we're going to start drying out further to the west. The high pressure is going to start building in across Kentucky, Tennessee. The last of the rain, though, will be entering into the Carolinas, and this is where we have a marginal risk tomorrow for any Sunday afternoon plans for an isolated strong to severe storm across this region. So still some lingering rain for Greenville area south of DC, Virginia Beach. It could be a wet Sunday afternoon, but this will eventually clear off the coast as we get overnight, and then dry weather will take over for Monday. So that covers the mid-Atlantic, the central and the eastern US. Now let's talk about the northern plains. This is the more significant risk of severe weather. First of all, this is our parent trough, our parent upper level low. You can kind of see all the rain in this region kind of circulating in a counterclockwise spin. Not as big of a severe weather risk in this exact area of spin, but what's going to happen is little spokes of energy are going to leach off of this parent low and move into the northern plains, and as these spokes of energy do that, they're going to spark thunderstorms, and that's where the strong to severe potential is kind of maximized. So we're talking about later into the afternoon hours, that's when some of these storm clusters form. Initially, some of these supercells could contain very large hail, again, baseball size is possible, but this is where a few of these tornadoes are possible. The modeling here, some of these storms do look like a little curvy, so we do have a little bit of rotation here, and there could be a strong tornado again in that hatched risk for an EF2 plus tornado. Eventually though, the threat shifts from tornadoes to damaging winds as our storms consolidate into more of a line. If we get a Boeing segment where this part of the radar kind of protrudes outwards in a Boeing echo, this is where particularly damaging winds are possible, maybe 70 to 80 miles per hour plus. So the exact convective evolution we'll just have to wait and see, but suffice it to say, you can see all these nasty storms in the region, initially supercelled with tornadoes, then damaging wind. Now overnight, everything will slowly shift to the east. We could still have some lingering severe hail, gusty winds. Activity will quiet as we get into the early morning hours. The severe weather threat will diminish, but some leftover rain is still possible. Shifting into day 2, everything will move a little bit further east. This is our parent low, spokes of energy coming off into northern Dakota and Minnesota, and by the afternoon, that's enough for some of these storms to produce damaging winds and large hail. Tornado threat tomorrow looks a lot lower than today. The further away these storms get from the parent low, the weaker they'll be, so that's why the severe weather risk is a little bit less. However, we still want to be weather aware in this region, because if any of these storms move near you, it could be pretty rough. Now, one last other pretty interesting thing I want to note is, do you see this blue that's showing up on our model here over portions of the mountains in Idaho, Wyoming, even into Montana? There's actually some winter storm warnings out here for the higher elevations of the mountains. This low pressure will be cold enough to drop some pretty significant snowfall. We're looking at a heavy wet snow that at the highest peaks could drop up to a foot of snow. So this is a bit unusual definitely for late June. Nothing unheard of. This area can get snow this late in the season, but definitely not normal, and it could catch some people off guard. So if you're doing traveling in this region, especially if you're going up in some of the mountains, prepare for a bit of a late season snowstorm here. But while the rest of us bakes in the heat, especially in the east, which I'll get to next, we do have a bit of winter still left over portions of the mountains. Now, other than that severe storm threat, there is also a bit of a flood threat developing over the central and eastern US, especially in this yellow and this newly upgraded red shade. Now, this red shade is in response to all the flooding we've already seen in Kentucky. We have additional rounds of rain moving through as I showed on the model, but we've also already seen a lot of rain in this region. So an additional 2 to 4 inches of rain, that's enough to cause some pretty significant flooding, not only of low water crossings and creeks and streams, but even some pretty significant urban flooding in any of the cities in this region. So we want to make sure we're watching out for that threat. Of course, always remember the saying to turn around, don't drown. Some higher end flooding impacts are possible. So that's the short term. Looking a little bit longer term beyond today and tomorrow, severe weather concerns do continue on Monday across the northern plains. However, as I mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty on just how exactly our severe weather evolves. It all depends on where the parent trough over the western US goes, how quickly it ejects to the northeast. You can see the surface low, at least the European model, is painting this well up into Canada. If this occurs, this would tend to focus more of the severe weather north into the Canada region. However, if this does move a little bit further south on the northern plains, you could be back on the table for more severe weather next week. Something to watch. We'll have more details as we get closer. Regardless, notice how we dry out over the central and eastern US. That's because that giant ridge of high pressure is building in this region, and this is also the region that's really going to heat up. So let's talk about that change in the weather pattern. We have all this cooler air. This is why some of that mountain snow is possible in the west that'll be moving in with that trough of low pressure. Meanwhile, we have all this warmer air building in the central and eastern US with that big ridge of high pressure, above average temperatures as much as 15 degrees, even 20 degrees in the northern plains. We're pushing the 90s, even near 100 degrees for air temperatures in some spots. And when you combine the temperatures with the humidity, that's going to make it feel even hotter. Humidity makes it harder to sweat, makes it harder for the body to cool down, and this can really push up the feels like temperatures. So notice how expansive this heat is, where areas in Detroit you could be feeling like 90 degrees, but just to your south across Illinois, St. Louis, we could be dealing with heat indices as high as 105 degrees. As we go later to this week, this peak heat continues, especially in these dark red colors. This is where heat indices could potentially get up to 110 in some localized corridors up to the north. So this is the first heat wave of the season, so many of us in these regions are not acclimated to these hot temperatures, and the heat can really be a silent threat, a silent killer. As we go later into the week, the heat might focus a little more into the mid-Atlantic. Look at this, Philadelphia, we could be feeling like 106 on July 2nd. New York could be feeling like 104, so very toasty conditions in this region. In terms of your July 4th weekend, as we get into the holidays, the heat might back off a little bit, but it's still going to be plenty hot. The upper 90s to even 100-degree heat indices will still extend well to the north, and this can take a serious toll on your outdoor plans. So stay hydrated and just planning your day around the heat. Make sure we're not underestimating it. Here's your heat risk map. Notice how the reds and the purples really take over the north. This is significant. This big swath of purple over the Ohio Valley into the Midwest, that's extreme. That's level 4 out of 4 heat, where nearly 80 million people will be under the gun. Not only is it the hot daytimes, it's also warm overnight temperatures that make it hard for your body to cool down. If it's hot in the day and then if it's warm in the night, your body just builds up this stress for heat, and over several days this can lead to some heat related illnesses. So a significant threat, especially as we get into outdoor activities toward the 4th of July weekend. So those are the big weather stories. We have a few other things I want to cover real quick though. So one thing that we're tracking that's pretty significant is the fire danger across the Four Corners portions of the Rocky Mountains. Today we have a rare 3 out of 3 extremely critical risk of fire. In this pink shade, this is western Colorado, eastern Utah, but even in this broader red shade, that's a 2 out of 3 critical risk for fire conditions. This is where we have very dry soils, very dry air. It's a desert out here, right? But we also have a lot of gusty winds moving through, so those winds can make it really easy for any fire that starts to quickly spread. We already do have several large fires burning in this region, and unfortunately poor weather fire conditions will exacerbate and make these fires hard to control, as well as potentially spark new additional fires. If you're living in these regions, make sure you have all your important documents gathered in one place and just be ready to evacuate in the scenario that a fire forms near you. Tomorrow we also still have a 2 out of 3 critical fire risk centered right around the Four Corners region, and this pattern of dry air and gusty winds could continue for a bit, so this is a pattern we're watching where some significant fire concerns are present. The last thing we're tracking new today is this tropical area that the National Hurricane Center is now monitoring for development just off the southeast coast. So this does have about a 20% chance of development as of this recording. There's still a lot of uncertainty with this far out, as you can imagine, but some of our models are latching on to something moving westward toward the United States that could potentially develop into a tropical depression, maybe a weak tropical storm. We can see here, this is a pressure map, and see this little red area that shows up? This is the area of low pressure that some of our models are trying to spin up into something. Right now, it doesn't look like anything really distinct, nothing really strong, and obviously odds are against this developing. This could potentially move though into Florida, portions of Georgia later into this weekend toward that 4th of July weekend. Could bring some rain even if it doesn't develop. We'll have a lot more updates with this as we get closer. Just an early heads up, there is some slight tropical activity potential, even though it's pretty low off the southeast coast. So wow, that's a lot that we're tracking, and it's all thanks to that ridge of high pressure. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed and you never want to miss another update in the world of weather, consider subscribing. Hope you all stay safe out there, not only for the severe weather threat, but also for the heat. Thanks for watching again, stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.